Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Living by yourself at 26 comes with its own set of rules, especially when you're a freelance photographer who keeps odd hours and forgets things constantly. The little brick duplex on Birch Avenue had been my sanctuary for almost 2 years, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where the biggest excitement was usually someone's cat getting stuck on a roof. My landlord, an elderly man named Harold, lived 3 states away and basically let me do whatever I wanted as long as the rent came on time. The spare key under the ceramic frog planter by my front door had been my safety net since my college dorm days, a habit I carried with me through 3 different apartments because I'd locked myself out more times than I care to admit. That Friday in October started like any other, except for the weather turning nasty around lunch. The rain came down in sheets while I was shooting an outdoor wedding that got moved inside last minute, leaving everyone stressed and me soaking wet despite my umbrella. By the time I got home around 9 that evening, my fingers were so numb I could barely grip my actual key. The porch light was already on, which seemed odd since I specifically remembered turning it off that morning to save electricity. When I turned the doorknob, it opened without resistance. The door was completely unlocked. My first thought was annoyance at myself because this wasn't the first time I'd rushed out and forgotten to lock up properly, though usually I at least remembered doing it. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside, like the air pressure had changed, or someone had rearranged the molecules in the space while I was gone. The living room lamp was on, the one with the finicky switch that you had to jiggle just right to make it work, casting long shadows across my photography equipment stacked in the corner. My laptop was still on the coffee table, but it was closed now, and I distinctly remembered leaving it open with my editing software running because I'd planned to finish touching up those engagement photos tonight. The throw pillows on my couch were perfectly arranged, which was bizarre because I never bothered fixing them, just left them however they landed when I got up. Even my coffee mug from the morning was cleaned and sitting in the dish rack, and I definitely hadn't washed it. My cat Phantom usually came running the second I walked through the door, meowing like I'd abandoned him for years instead of hours. But tonight I found him crouched under the dining table, his yellow eyes wide and his black fur standing up along his spine like he'd been electrocuted. When I reached for him, he hissed at me, before darting upstairs. In the 2 years since I'd adopted him from the shelter, he'd never acted like that, not even when the vet had to give him shots. The rain kept hammering against the windows, and somewhere in the house I heard what sounded like footsteps above me, but I told myself it was just water in the gutters or the old pipes doing their thing. The kitchen was where things got really weird. Every single cabinet door was open about 3 inches, not thrown wide, just cracked uniformly like someone had gone through checking what was inside each one. My knife block on the counter had 1 empty slot, the big chef's knife missing, and I knew for certain it had been there this morning because I'd used it to cut an apple. The trash can had been moved from its usual spot by the sink to the middle of the floor, and inside were things I didn't recognize: an empty can of soup I never bought, a crumpled receipt from a gas station 20 miles away, and strangest of all, a pair of latex gloves turned inside out. My appetite vanished completely, replaced by this crawling sensation across my scalp like insects were nesting in my hair. Upstairs, my bedroom door was closed, which was wrong because I always left it open for Phantom to come and go as he pleased. Through the door, I could hear something, a rhythmic sound barely audible over the storm outside. It took me a full minute standing there in the hallway, my ear almost pressed against the wood, to realize what it was. Breathing. Slow, deep breathing, like someone sleeping or trying very hard to stay calm. My rational brain kept insisting it had to be the wind or the house settling, but my body knew better. Every muscle in my legs was screaming at me to run, to get out of the house right now, but I couldn't move. The doorknob was cold under my palm when I finally touched it, colder than it should have been, and when I started to turn it, the breathing stopped. The door swung open to reveal my bedroom exactly as I'd left it that morning, except for the man sitting on the edge of my bed. He was maybe 40, wearing a rain-soaked windbreaker and jeans, his thinning hair plastered to his skull. His shoes had left wet prints across my carpet, creating a trail from the window to the bed. In his lap was my missing chef's knife, and he was running his thumb along the blade's edge with the practiced motion of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. When he looked up at me, his eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, completely empty of any emotion I could recognize. He didn't jump or act surprised to see me. Instead, he smiled, not menacing or crazy, just pleasant, like we were old friends meeting for coffee. "You're home earlier than usual," he said in this conversational tone, as if we did this every Friday night. The wedding must have wrapped up quick. That's when it hit me like a physical blow to the chest. He knew where I'd been. He knew my schedule. This wasn't some random break-in by a stranger who'd gotten lucky finding my spare key. This man had been watching me, learning my routines, maybe for weeks or months. The ceramic frog with the key had been slightly crooked when I'd come home, I realize now, not quite in its usual position against the planter. He stood up slowly, still holding the knife but not threatening with it, just carrying it like you'd carry a book or a phone. "I've been keeping the place tidy for you," he continued, taking a step toward me. "I noticed you're always so tired when you come home. Those dishes were piling up, and the living room needed straightening." His voice was soft, almost caring, which made everything infinitely worse. Behind me, Phantom yowled from somewhere down the hall, a sound of pure animal terror. My phone was in my back pocket, but reaching for it seemed impossible with him watching me so intently. He must have seen me glance toward the stairs because he shook his head gently, like a parent correcting a child. "You don't need to leave," he said, moving past me into the hallway, close enough that I could smell him. A mixture of rain, cigarette smoke, and something medicinal like cough syrup. "I made soup earlier, it's still warm on the stove. You haven't been eating properly, just coffee and those protein bars." He knew what I ate. He'd been in my house when I was gone, going through my trash, my refrigerator, learning every detail of my life. My legs finally responded, and I bolted down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time, my socks sliding on the wood. Behind me, his footsteps followed. Not running, just walking steadily, unhurried. The front door was locked. Not just locked, but deadbolted from the inside, and my keys were upstairs in my camera bag. The back door through the kitchen was my only option, but when I reached it, yanking on the handle, it wouldn't budge. He'd done something to it, jammed it somehow. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, still carrying the knife loosely at his side. "I grew up in this house," he said quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "My parents owned it for 30 years before they died, and it became a rental. I still have all the original keys, even the ones to locks that were supposedly changed." He pulled out a keyring from his pocket, dozens of keys jangling together. "That ceramic frog was my mother's. She kept her spare key there too." His eyes drifted around the kitchen with this nostalgic look. "You've changed so much, but I can still see how it used to be. My bedroom was upstairs where yours is now. Sometimes I come here when you're at work and just sit in there, remembering." The window above the kitchen sink was small but maybe big enough. While he was lost in his memories, talking about Sunday dinners and birthday parties that happened decades ago, I grabbed a chair and climbed up. The window was painted shut, layers and layers of old paint sealing it like cement. I slammed my elbow against the glass, shattering it, feeling the shards cut through my sleeve. The rain poured in immediately, cold and shocking. He didn't try to stop me, just watched with this disappointed expression as I cleared the broken glass with a dish towel and forced myself through the opening. I felt my ribs scraping against the frame, my hip catching on something sharp. But then, I was falling into the muddy flower bed outside. The neighbor's house was lit up next door, maybe 50 feet away. I ran barefoot through the yard, screaming for help, not caring how crazy I looked. Behind me, I heard the back door finally open. He must have unjammed it, and his calm voice calling out, I'll see you tomorrow then. I spent that night at my neighbor's house while the police searched my home. They found evidence that he'd been coming and going for at least 6 months. Receipts hidden in the attic, a sleeping bag in the crawl space, even a journal where he'd written down my daily activities. Harold, my landlord, was shocked when they called him. He swore he'd changed all the locks when he bought the place 5 years ago. But the locksmith they brought in showed us how some of the internal mechanisms were original, probably from the 60s. The man, his name was Gregory Dalton, was arrested at his apartment the next morning, surrounded by photos of my house from every angle, including some taken from inside while I was sleeping. The ceramic frog planter turned out to be the key to everything. His mother really had owned it, and when he saw it in the same spot decades later, something in his mind had snapped. He genuinely believed he still lived there, that I was just a guest who'd stayed too long. The police found 3 other spare keys he'd made, hidden around the property in places only someone who'd grown up there would know. Inside a fake rock by the basement window, under a loose brick in the back walkway, even one in the garage rafters. I moved out the next week, staying with my sister across town until I found a new place, an apartment on the 4th floor with a doorman and security cameras everywhere. No spare keys hidden anywhere, just a digital lock with a code I change every month. Gregory got 5 years for stalking and breaking and entering, but that's not what keeps me awake at night. It's knowing that for 6 months, while I was living my life, thinking I was safe in my own home, he was there too, washing my dishes, sitting on my bed, watching me sleep. The detective told me they found over 300 photos on his computer, documenting everything from my morning coffee routine to the way I arranged my pillows at night. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 in the morning, convinced I can hear breathing that isn't mine, even though I know it's impossible. Phantom never recovered from that night. He hides under furniture whenever anyone comes to visit, and he still won't go near windows. Last week I got a letter from Gregory in prison. I didn't open it, just handed it straight to the police, but I saw my name written on the envelope in neat, careful handwriting, and underneath it, in smaller letters, "I kept the house so nice for you." They tell me he'll probably be transferred to a psychiatric facility soon, but knowing he's locked up doesn't make me feel any safer. Because now I understand that the real horror isn't the stranger who breaks into your house. It's discovering they never thought they were breaking in at all. Last Friday night changed everything about how I see crowds, how I trust people in uniform, and why I'll never ignore my gut instinct again. The Riverside Arena downtown was hosting this indie rock show I'd been dying to see for months, and I'd gone alone because my roommate Ashley bailed last minute with a stomach bug. I almost didn't go myself, honestly, but I'd already paid for the ticket and figured why waste it. The venue was packed wall to wall with maybe 3,000 people, all of us crammed into that converted warehouse space that usually felt so intimate and electric. The opening band had just finished their set, and we were all waiting for the main act, this Portland-based group that had been climbing the charts for months. I remember standing near the middle section, close enough to see the stage but with a clear view of the main entrance I'd come through, and I was texting Ashley a photo of the crowd when everything went sideways. The fire alarm was so loud it felt like someone was drilling directly into my eardrums, those industrial sirens that make your whole body tense up instantly. People started looking around confused, some laughing nervously, others pulling out their phones to record what they thought was probably a prank or malfunction. Then these security guards appeared, but not the usual guys I recognized from previous shows. These were different, wearing black uniforms with reflective vests, moving through the crowd with this urgent, almost aggressive energy. They were shouting over the alarm, waving flashlights even though the house lights were still on, directing everyone away from the main entrance and toward the back of the venue. "Emergency evacuation, move to the rear exit, stay calm but move quickly," they kept repeating, their voices sharp and commanding. My 32 years of going to concerts had taught me where all the exits usually were in these venues, but I'd never seen security push everyone toward the back maintenance areas before. The crowd started shifting like a massive wave, bodies pressing together as everyone began moving in the same direction, and I felt myself getting swept along even though something in my chest was telling me this wasn't right. I caught a glimpse of one of the regular exit signs, the green ones that are always lit up above the side doors, pointing left toward what I knew was a proper fire exit that led straight to the parking lot. But these new security guards were herding us right, deeper into the building, toward a section I'd only ever seen venue staff use. The woman next to me, maybe college age with bright purple hair and a nose ring, grabbed my arm for balance as we got pushed forward, and I heard her ask one of the guards why we weren't using the normal exits. He didn't even look at her, just kept shouting, "Keep moving, emergency protocol, rear exit only," like he was some kind of recording on loop. The smell back there was different too. Not the usual mix of beer and sweat from the concert floor, but something stale and metallic, like old pipes and dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. We were being funneled into this narrow corridor with concrete walls, maybe 8 feet wide, and the temperature dropped noticeably as soon as we passed through the doorway. The further we went, the quieter the fire alarm became, muffled by the concrete and distance, which made no sense because shouldn't we be heading outside where it would be louder? I tried to stop, to turn around and push back through the crowd, but there were too many people behind me, all pressing forward with that mindless urgency that takes over in emergencies. The security guards had positioned themselves along the walls every 20 feet or so, their flashlights creating these harsh circles of light in what was becoming an increasingly dim space. The overhead fluorescents were spaced too far apart, leaving long stretches of shadow between them, and I noticed some weren't even working, just dark fixtures covered in years of grime. Someone's phone flashlight swept across the ceiling and I saw exposed pipes, some wrapped in what looked like ancient insulation, and water stains that spread out like diseased flowers across the concrete. The purple-haired girl was still next to me, and I heard her whisper to her boyfriend that this didn't feel like any evacuation route she'd ever seen, and he pulled her closer, his jaw tight with the same unease I was feeling in my bones. We must have been walking for 5 minutes, though it felt like hours, when the corridor took a sharp turn to the left and suddenly split into 2 passages. The security guards were directing people into both, splitting the crowd seemingly at random, and I watched as the purple-haired girl and her boyfriend got pushed into the left passage, while I got swept into the right. The panic really started to set in then, because fire evacuations don't work like this. They don't separate people, they don't take you deeper underground, and they definitely don't last this long. I could hear voices echoing from the other passage, getting fainter, and our group of maybe 300 people kept moving forward into what was becoming a maze of service tunnels. The walls were sweating now, beads of moisture running down the concrete like the building itself was nervous, and the air tasted wrong, recycled and thick like we were running out of oxygen. A man ahead of me tried to stop and ask one of the guards where exactly this exit was supposed to be, and the guard just pushed him forward, hard, causing him to stumble into the people in front of him. That's when I noticed their faces. The guards, I mean. Under those reflective vests and black uniforms, they all looked wrong somehow, like their features were too similar, too vacant, as if someone had hired a bunch of mannequins and taught them only 3 phrases to repeat. None of them were sweating despite the panic. None of them looked concerned about the supposed fire, and when one turned his flashlight toward his own face for a second, I saw his eyes were completely dilated, black pools that reflected nothing. My phone still had signal, barely 1 bar, and I tried to call 911, but the call wouldn't connect. Just gave me this weird busy signal I'd never heard before, like static mixed with something breathing. Others were having the same problem. I could see them holding their phones up, trying to get signal, their faces lit by screens showing emergency calls only or no service, even though we were still technically inside the city, inside a building that normally had perfect reception. The corridor narrowed again, forcing us to walk almost single file, and I felt the walls with my fingertips. They were cold and damp and seemed to pulse with some kind of vibration, like there was machinery running somewhere behind them. People were starting to panic openly now, some crying, others shouting that they wanted to go back, but the guards just kept pushing us forward with this mechanical persistence that made my stomach churn. A woman in front of me, wearing a vintage band t-shirt and mom jeans, suddenly stopped and tried to turn around, screaming that her daughter was in the other group, that she needed to find her daughter. Two guards grabbed her arms and literally carried her forward while she kicked and screamed, and the rest of us just watched, too shocked or too scared to intervene. The corridor started sloping downward, gradual at first but then steeper, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness ahead, each drop echoing like a countdown to something terrible. My feet were starting to hurt from walking on the uneven concrete, and I realized we must have covered at least half a mile underground by now, maybe more, going deeper and deeper into what couldn't possibly be part of the original building structure. The air was getting thicker, harder to breathe, and people were starting to cough, that dry hacking sound that comes from bad air and fear combined. Then the lights went out completely, all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. The darkness was so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing against my eyes, and the screaming started immediately, people pushing and shoving in pure animal panic. The guards' flashlights came on, but instead of helping, they made everything worse, the beams cutting through the darkness in sharp, disorienting angles that turned the crowd into a writhing mass of shadows and terrified faces. Someone fell near me and got trampled. I heard them crying out but couldn't see them, couldn't help them, could only keep moving forward or risk being crushed myself. The guards started chanting something in unison, not in English, not in any language I recognized, their voices harmonizing in this low, thrumming rhythm that seemed to make the walls vibrate even more. And then, suddenly there were doors, heavy metal doors slamming shut behind us with definitive bangs that echoed through the tunnel like gunshots. I heard them closing in sequence, boom, 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 cutting off any possibility of retreat, and someone near me started praying, their voice high and desperate in the darkness. The chanting from the guards stopped abruptly, and in the silence that followed, I could hear hundreds of people breathing, whimpering, shuffling in the dark like we were all trapped in the belly of some massive beast. Then new lights flickered on, but these weren't the harsh fluorescents from before. They were red emergency lights that bathed everything in this hellish glow that made everyone look like they were already covered in blood. We were in a large room now, maybe the size of a gymnasium, with concrete walls and a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. Metal folding chairs were arranged in perfect rows facing a small raised platform at the far end, and the guards were directing people to sit, their movements still mechanical, still wrong. But here's the thing that made my brain refuse to process what I was seeing. There were already people sitting in some of the chairs, completely still, facing forward, not turning to look at us newcomers even as we filed in crying and terrified. They wore regular clothes, jeans, and t-shirts and sneakers, but they sat with this unnatural stillness that made them look more like props than people. I tried to resist, to stay standing, but a guard's hand clamped down on my shoulder with crushing force and pushed me into a chair in the middle section. The metal was ice cold through my jeans, and I noticed there were straps attached to the armrests and legs, though they weren't fastened yet. The woman next to me, different from before, maybe in her 40s with graying hair and a ponytail, grabbed my hand and squeezed so hard I thought she might break my fingers. "This isn't real. This can't be real," she kept repeating, but we both knew it was. On the platform, a man appeared wearing a pristine white suit that seemed to glow under the red lights, his face obscured by shadows except for his mouth, which was stretched into this too wide smile that showed too many teeth. He raised his arms like a conductor about to begin a symphony, and the guards all stepped back against the walls in perfect synchronization. "Welcome," he said, his voice carrying impossibly well in the large space, seeming to come from everywhere at once, "to recruitment." My blood turned to ice water in my veins as I finally understood. This wasn't an evacuation, wasn't a kidnapping in any traditional sense, but something much worse. Something organized and planned and executed with terrifying precision. The man in white began speaking about purposes and positions, about how we'd been selected from specific demographic markers and psychological profiles built from our social media, our purchasing habits, our predictable Friday night routines. His words washed over me in waves of nonsense about corporate expansion and human resources and market optimization, but delivered with this evangelical fervor that made it sound like he was describing something holy. Behind him, a projection appeared on the wall showing logos I didn't recognize. Companies with names like Nexus Solutions and Paradigm Collective, corporate speak that meant nothing and everything. The still people in the chairs around us began to move their heads in unison, turning to look at us newcomers, and their eyes were empty, pupils blown wide just like the guards, their faces slack with whatever had been done to them. The woman still clutching my hand suddenly let go and stood up, her movements jerky like a marionette, and she walked to the front of the room and sat in one of the empty chairs in the first row, facing forward, going completely still. Others were doing the same, getting up one by one and finding empty seats closer to the platform, and I realized with growing horror that something in the air, maybe in the lights, maybe in his voice, was doing something to us. But then the real fire alarm went off. Not the fake one from before, but the actual building system, high and sharp and accompanied by the sprinkler system activating throughout the complex above us. The man in white's smile faltered for just a second, and the guards looked at each other with the first sign of confusion I'd seen from them. Water started seeping through cracks in the ceiling, and real smoke began filtering down through the ventilation system. Someone had set an actual fire, maybe on purpose, maybe by accident, but it broke whatever spell was being woven in that room. People started standing up, not in that puppet-like way, but with real panic rushing toward the doors we'd entered through. The guards tried to maintain order, but there were too many of us, and when the first person managed to break through their line, it was like a dam bursting. I ran with the crowd, pushing through the dark corridors as emergency lighting kicked in for real this time, following exit signs that hadn't been there before, or maybe I just hadn't seen them in my terror. We burst out through a loading dock into the parking lot, where fire trucks were already arriving, and I've never been so happy to see those flashing red lights that were real, attached to real emergency vehicles, with real firefighters who looked at us with genuine concern and confusion about why 300 people were pouring out of a supposedly empty section of the building. The official story was that someone had pulled a false alarm during the concert as a prank, causing a stampede that led us into restricted areas where we got lost in the service tunnels until the real fire started. The venue was shut down for fire code violations, and everyone got their ticket money refunded. But here's what haunts me. Out of the 3,000 people at that concert, only about 300 of us made it out of those tunnels. The others, including the purple-haired girl and her boyfriend, were never found. The police said they must have evacuated through different exits, but no security footage exists from that night, all mysteriously corrupted or erased. The security company that supposedly handled the evacuation doesn't exist in any business registry. Those corporations the man mentioned, Nexus Solutions and Paradigm Collective, they're real, they're massive, and they're connected to dozens of entertainment venues across the country. I've tried to warn people online, but my posts get deleted within hours, and twice now I've noticed men in black uniforms standing across from my apartment building, just watching. I moved cities, changed my phone number, deleted all my social media, but sometimes I still hear that chanting in my dreams, and I know they're still out there, still recruiting, still using concerts and crowds, and our need for entertainment to select and collect whatever they need us for. I don't go to shows anymore, don't go to movies, don't go anywhere with crowds and single exits, because now I know that sometimes the real danger isn't fire or stampedes or any normal emergency. It's the people who pretend to save you while leading you straight into something that has no name but definitely has a purpose. And that purpose involves turning regular people into those empty-eyed puppets sitting silent in rows, waiting for instructions that, hopefully, thankfully, never came for me. The night everything went wrong started just like any other Friday evening, delivering packages for one of those big companies everyone knows. My route that particular evening in late November had me covering the southeastern district, mostly residential neighborhoods and a few office complexes that stayed open late. The van felt like a second home after 2 years of doing this job, with its familiar smell of cardboard and that one squeaky wheel that sang whenever I turned left. By 11:30 that night, I had just one package left to deliver, some electronics going to an address way out near the old factories. My wife Jessica had texted me earlier, asking when I'd be home because our daughter Lily couldn't sleep without her bedtime story from Daddy. I remember texting back that I'd be there by midnight, maybe 12:30 at the latest if traffic was bad. 34 years on this earth and I'd never broken a promise to my little girl. Wasn't about to start now. The highway stretched out ahead of me like a black ribbon, those orange streetlights creating little pools of light every 100 feet or so. My usual exit, Cranbrook Road, would take me straight home in about 20 minutes, but somehow in my exhaustion and with my mind on Lily's bedtime story, I completely missed it. Didn't even realize until I saw the sign for Millwater Junction, which meant I'd gone about 3 miles too far. No big deal though, or at least that's what I thought at the time. The GPS on my phone showed a route through the industrial district that would actually shave off 5 minutes from my usual drive home. It looked simple enough on the screen, just a series of right turns through what used to be the manufacturing heart of our city, before most of the factories shut down in the early 2000s. The area wasn't completely abandoned. Some warehouses still operated during day shifts, but at this hour on a Friday night, it would be empty except for maybe a security guard or two doing rounds. The first 10 minutes went fine, just me and the hum of the van's engine echoing off the corrugated metal walls of abandoned buildings. Then the GPS started acting up, the little blue dot that represented my position jumping around the map like it couldn't figure out where I was. The signal bars dropped from 4 to 2, then to 1, and finally that dreaded message popped up. GPS signal lost, searching for connection. Great, just great. I pulled over next to what looked like an old textile factory, its windows all boarded up except for a few on the 3rd floor where the plywood had fallen off, leaving black holes that stared down at the street. The area was darker than I expected, with most of the streetlights either broken or just never replaced when they burned out. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty loading docks and rusted chain-link fences topped with razor wire that had gone brown with age. That's when I noticed him, standing next to a white panel truck about 50 feet ahead of where I'd stopped. The guy wasn't doing anything particularly strange, just standing there having a smoke, but finding anyone out here at this hour made me pause for a second. He wore dark work clothes, maybe navy blue or black, hard to tell in the dim light from the one functioning street light near his truck. As I sat there trying to get my phone to reconnect, he noticed me and started walking over with this casual, unhurried pace. Something about the way he moved reminded me of my Uncle Frank, who worked construction his whole life and had that same deliberate way of walking, like every step was planned out in advance. When he got close enough, I rolled down my window halfway, keeping the engine running just in case. He had one of those faces that could have been anywhere from 45 to 60, weathered and lined but not necessarily old, with gray stubble covering his jaw and deep-set eyes that caught the light from my dashboard. "Lost?" he asked, his voice raspy like he'd been smoking for decades, which, judging by the cigarette between his fingers, he probably had. I explained about missing my exit and how my GPS had died right when I needed it most. Asked if he knew how to get back to the main highway from here. He scratched his stubble and looked down the street ahead of us, then back the way I'd come, taking his time like he was doing complex math in his head. "Yeah, I know these streets like the back of my hand," he said, flicking his cigarette into the gutter where it landed in a small shower of orange sparks. "Been working this area for 15 years, doing night maintenance on the equipment they left behind when the factories closed. Your best bet is actually forward, not back. If you try to reverse course now, you'll hit all the one-way streets they put in for the morning delivery trucks." He gestured toward my van with a hand that had 2 fingers wrapped in dirty medical tape. Tell you what, it's complicated to explain, but I can show you. My shift just ended anyway, and I live right near where you need to go. Before I could really think it through, before I could weigh the pros and cons like Jessica always said I should do more often, he was already walking around to the passenger side. The door handle clicked and suddenly he was settling into the seat next to me, bringing with him the smell of machine oil and stale tobacco. "Name's Carl," he said, buckling his seatbelt with those taped-up fingers like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Just head straight for now. I'll tell you when to turn." My gut did this little twist. Not quite fear, but definitely unease. The kind of feeling you get when you realize you've made a decision you can't easily take back. But what was I going to do? Tell him to get out? The guy was just trying to help, and I really did need directions. I put the van in drive and started forward, noticing in my peripheral vision how he was looking around the interior of the van, taking in all the packages in the back, the delivery scanner in its holster, my phone mounted on the dashboard still showing that useless searching for signal message. We drove for about 3 minutes in relative silence, just the sound of the engine and the occasional direction from Carl. "Left here," he'd say, or "keep straight through this intersection." The streets got progressively narrower, and I noticed we hadn't passed a single working streetlight in the last minute. The buildings seemed to press in closer, old loading bays and service entrances creating dark recesses where anything could be hiding. Then Carl said something that made my chest tighten. "You know, most drivers don't come through here anymore. Not since that thing with the other delivery guy a few months back." He let that hang in the air while directing me to take another right turn. "What thing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual even though warning bells were going off in my head. Carl chuckled, this low sound that didn't contain any actual humor. "Oh, nothing proven. Guy just disappeared one night, found his van 2 weeks later parked in one of these old lots. Still had all the packages in it, nothing stolen, just no driver." He pointed ahead to a fork in the road I hadn't noticed. "Bear left here, trust me." The word trust coming out of his mouth felt wrong somehow, like when someone says honestly right before they lie to you. Every turn we made seemed to take us deeper into this maze of abandoned buildings and dead-end service roads. When I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, it showed 11:47, and I realized we'd been driving for almost 10 minutes but hadn't seen a single sign pointing toward the highway. "Hey Carl," I started, trying to keep any accusation out of my voice. "Shouldn't we have hit a main road by now?" He shifted in his seat, the vinyl creaking under his weight, and I caught him looking at the lock button on his door. "These old industrial routes are tricky," he said, but there was something different in his tone now, less helpful stranger and more like someone working hard to sound convincing. "Just a little further. Take this next right." But when I looked where he was pointing, all I saw was an alley barely wide enough for the van, with walls so close on either side that I wouldn't be able to open my door if I needed to get out quickly. I stopped the van right there, didn't even pull to the side, just hit the brakes in the middle of the empty street. "I'm not going down there," I said, surprising myself with how firm my voice came out. "This isn't the way to the highway, Carl." "Where are you really taking me?" The friendly mask he'd been wearing slipped for just a second, and I saw something else underneath, something that made every muscle in my body go tense. He recovered quickly, though, putting on this wounded expression like I'd hurt his feelings. "Hey now, I'm just trying to help here. This is the shortcut, I promise. My brother actually owns a warehouse just past this alley. We can cut straight through his lot and you'll pop out right by the on-ramp." His hand moved to his pocket, and I heard the distinctive jingle of keys. "Matter of fact, I've got the keys right here. Come on, your little girl is waiting for you, right? Didn't you say something about a bedtime story?" The fact that he remembered that detail, that he'd been paying that close attention to what I'd said earlier, sent ice through my veins. That's when I made my decision. I threw the van in reverse and started backing up fast, probably faster than was safe, but I didn't care anymore. Carl's whole demeanor changed instantly, his hand shooting out to grab the wheel. "What are you doing?" he shouted. But it wasn't a question, it was a demand. I yanked the wheel hard to the left while still in reverse, causing Carl to lose his balance and slam against the passenger door. "Get out!" I yelled, hitting the brakes again. "Get out of my van right now!" But instead of reaching for the door handle, he lunged across the center console, trying to grab the keys from the ignition. We struggled for a few seconds that felt like hours, him trying to turn off the engine while I fought to keep his hands away. His taped fingers were stronger than they looked, and I could smell his breath sour and hot as he pressed closer. Then my hand found the delivery scanner in its holster, the heavy handheld device we use to scan packages, and without thinking, I swung it as hard as I could against the side of his head. The scanner connected with a dull thud, and Carl jerked back, his hand going to his temple where a cut had opened up, blood already starting to seep between his fingers. For a moment, we just stared at each other, both breathing hard, and then he smiled. Not a normal smile, but this slow, knowing thing that made me want to hit him again. "You have no idea where you are, do you?" he said, his voice calm despite the blood now running down the side of his face. "Good luck finding your way out." Then he opened the door and stepped out into the darkness, but he didn't run or stumble. He just walked calmly back the way we'd come, whistling something tuneless that echoed off the empty buildings. I slammed my hand on the door locks the second he was out, then sat there for a moment trying to stop shaking, trying to think. My phone still had no signal. The GPS was still dead, and now I was even more lost than before. Worse, Carl knew exactly where I was, and he didn't seem worried about me getting away. I spent the next 2 hours driving through those dark streets, taking random turns, trying to find any landmark I recognized or any sign pointing toward civilization. Every shadow looked like Carl. Every distant sound made me check the mirrors. Twice I thought I saw his white panel truck in the distance, always just far enough away that I couldn't be sure. Finally, around 2 in the morning, I spotted the glow of a 24-hour gas station in the distance and practically cried with relief. When I pulled in, the attendant took one look at me and asked if I needed him to call the police. I told him I'd gotten lost and had some trouble with a stranger, kept it vague because how could I explain what had really happened? He let me use the station's landline to call Jessica, and when I heard her sleepy, worried voice asking where I was, I nearly broke down completely. The police took a report, but when I tried to describe where everything had happened, I realized I had no idea. The officer said they'd had similar reports before about that area. People getting led deeper into the industrial district by someone offering help, though nobody could ever prove anything criminal had actually happened. They never found Carl or his truck, if that was even his real name. I quit the delivery job 3 weeks later. Couldn't handle driving those late-night routes anymore. Every time I passed an industrial area or saw a white panel truck in my mirrors, my heart would start racing. Jessica understood, said she'd rather have me home safe making less money than out there wondering if I'd make it back. Sometimes I search online for news about that area, looking for other drivers with similar stories, and I've found a few scattered posts on trucking forums. Always the same pattern. Helpful stranger knows the area like the back of his hand. Taped fingers leads them deeper until they barely escape. One driver mentioned finding scratches on his van later that spelled out an address, but when he looked it up, it was just an empty lot where a factory burned down in 1987. Another said he went back during daylight with some friends to retrace his route, but the streets didn't match up with what he remembered, like the whole layout had changed. I don't know what Carl wanted that night, whether it was the van, the packages, or something worse. All I know is that when Lily asks me to check her closet for monsters now, I do it thoroughly, because I learned that sometimes the real monsters are just men who smile at you while leading you exactly where you don't want to go. The divorce papers had been signed for about 2 months when Kevin called me out of the blue on a Wednesday afternoon in late September. 27 years old and already divorced. That wasn't exactly how I'd pictured my life going, but there I was, living in a studio apartment that smelled like the previous tenant's cats, eating takeout straight from the container most nights. Kevin and I had been roommates at State University for 3 years, and hearing his voice after nearly 5 years of sporadic Facebook likes and birthday texts caught me completely off guard. He said he'd heard about me and Melissa splitting up through mutual friends, and he wanted to help me get my mind off things with a weekend at his family's cabin up north. The way he described it, fishing, beer, catching up like old times, sounded exactly like what I needed to pull myself out of the rut I'd been drowning in since moving out of the house Melissa and I had shared. The drive up that Friday took me through stretches of pine forest that got thicker the further I went from the city, following Kevin's handwritten directions because GPS stopped working about 40 miles back. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that my sedan barely managed, surrounded by trees so dense you couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. Kevin met me at the door wearing the same crooked grin he'd had in college, though his hairline had retreated considerably, and he'd put on maybe 30 pounds. He grabbed my bag before I could protest and gave me the tour. 2 bedrooms upstairs, a living area with a stone fireplace, a kitchen that looked recently renovated with expensive appliances that seemed out of place in such a rustic setting. The basement door stood at the end of the hallway, painted white but with scratches near the handle like someone had tried picking the lock. Kevin noticed me looking at it and quickly steered me toward the back deck, mentioning something about his dad keeping hunting equipment down there. Nothing interesting, just old gear and spider webs. That first evening started off exactly how I'd hoped. We grilled steaks on the deck while polishing off a 12-pack of the cheap beer we used to drink in college, swapping stories about old professors, and that time we almost got expelled for the prank with the dean's golf cart. But every 20 minutes or so, Kevin would pull out his phone, squinting at the screen in that way people do when they're trying to be subtle about checking messages. Each time, his jaw would tighten just a little before he'd slip it back in his pocket and launch into another story, usually louder than before, like he was trying to distract both of us from whatever he'd just read. Around 10 that night, after we'd moved inside and started on the whiskey, I asked him about work. He'd mentioned something about consulting when he called, but he got weirdly vague, saying he was between projects, doing some freelance stuff, nothing worth talking about. The conversation died after that, and he suggested we call it a night since he had something planned for Saturday morning. The guest bedroom upstairs had that musty smell places get when they're not used often, with a window that faced the woods and a radiator that clanged every few minutes like someone was hitting it with a wrench. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up needing the bathroom and heard Kevin talking downstairs, his voice low but urgent, saying something about tomorrow night and everything needs to be ready. Through the thin floorboards, I could make out him pacing back and forth in the living room, the old wood creaking under his weight in a rhythm that went on for at least 10 minutes. When I finally got up to use the bathroom, I tried to move quietly, but the hallway floor groaned under my feet, and Kevin's voice immediately stopped. By the time I made it back to bed, the house had gone completely silent except for that damned radiator, but I could have sworn I heard a car engine starting up somewhere in the distance, which made no sense since the nearest neighbor was supposedly miles away. Saturday morning, Kevin was already up making breakfast when I came downstairs, scrambling eggs and frying bacon like nothing weird had happened the night before. He'd set out orange juice in a pitcher I remembered from our college apartment, the one with the chip on the handle from when we'd both tried to catch it after knocking it off the counter. But his eyes had dark circles underneath them, and his smile seemed forced, like he was playing a character in a play he hadn't properly rehearsed. When I mentioned hearing voices last night, he laughed it off, said he'd been on the phone with his girlfriend who was having drama with her roommate. Nothing serious. Sorry if it woke me up. The thing is, Kevin had told me he was single when he called to invite me up here, specifically mentioned how we were both bachelor refugees now. Before I could bring this up, he was already ushering me outside, saying we should take advantage of the good weather and hike to the lake about a mile through the woods. The trail to the lake was barely visible, more like a deer path that Kevin seemed to know by memory, pointing out markers I couldn't distinguish. A bent tree here, a weird-shaped rock there, like he'd walked this route 100 times before. About halfway there, we passed another cabin, smaller and more run down than Kevin's, with boarded-up windows and a blue tarp over part of the roof. Kevin picked up his pace when we got near it, but I noticed fresh tire tracks in the mud leading to it, and what looked like smoke residue coming from the chimney. When I pointed this out, Kevin just shrugged and said, "Hunters sometimes used abandoned places illegally, especially during off-season. Better not to get involved." The lake itself was beautiful, surrounded by pine trees and perfectly still water that reflected the clouds like a mirror. But Kevin kept checking his phone even out there, fumbling with it when he thought I wasn't looking, and at one point, I saw him typing what looked like numbers, times maybe, into his notes app. We got back to the cabin around 4 in the afternoon, and Kevin immediately went to check on dinner, which seemed weird since it was way too early to start cooking. Through the kitchen window, I watched him walk around the side of the house to where his truck was parked, and he pulled out a black duffel bag from the bed that definitely hadn't been there when I arrived. He struggled with its weight, needing both hands to carry it, and instead of bringing it through the front door like a normal person, he went around back. I heard the storm cellar doors slam shut, the outside entrance to the basement I hadn't even noticed before. When he came back inside 15 minutes later, he was sweating despite the cool September air, and there was dirt under his fingernails that he kept trying to clean out with his pocket knife. He told me dinner would be ready at 8 sharp, that he'd invited a couple friends from the area to join us, guys who wanted to meet me after hearing so much about our college days. The 2 men who showed up just before 8 looked nothing like the kind of friends Kevin would have had. The first one, who introduced himself as Doug, stood about 6'4" with arms thick as fence posts and a neck tattoo of something written in what looked like Russian or Ukrainian. The other guy, Rodrigo, was shorter but moved with this careful precision, like every gesture was calculated, and he had these pale gray eyes that never seemed to blink when he looked at you. They both shook my hand too hard and too long, studying my face like they were memorizing it. Neither of them touched the food Kevin had prepared, grilled chicken and vegetables that actually looked pretty good, just nursed beers while asking me strange questions about my life. Did I travel much for work? Did I have family nearby? When was the last time I'd posted on social media? Had I told anyone where I was this weekend? That last one made my chest tighten, because I realized I hadn't. Everyone knew I was taking time to myself after the divorce, and Kevin had specifically suggested I disconnect for the weekend. After about an hour of this bizarre dinner party, Doug stood up and announced they should get started, which made Kevin go rigid in his chair. Rodrigo pulled out his phone and showed Kevin something on the screen that made all the color drain from his face. Kevin started stammering about needing more time, that this wasn't what they'd agreed on. But Doug just put a massive hand on his shoulder and squeezed until Kevin winced. That's when Rodrigo turned to me with this matter-of-fact tone and explained that Kevin owed them $78,000 from a gambling debt that had been accumulating interest for the past 18 months. The cabin, Rodrigo continued, wasn't actually Kevin's family place. He'd been renting it through a fake ID for situations like this. They needed someone with clean credit and no criminal record to drive a car across the Canadian border on Sunday night. A car that would have a hidden compartment built into the floor. The black duffel bag Kevin had brought in earlier contained the tools they'd used to create the compartment, and I'd been chosen because recently divorced men trying to start over were perfect candidates, desperate for connection, distracted by their own problems, and unlikely to be missed immediately if things went wrong. Kevin wouldn't look at me while Rodrigo laid out their plan, just stared at his plate, pushing the untouched chicken around with his fork. They expected me to drive a modified SUV from here to a location outside Montreal, where someone would meet me at a rest stop to retrieve what was hidden in the compartment. They never said what it was, but the way Doug kept mentioning how Border Patrol rarely checked law-abiding citizens with steady employment histories told me enough. If I refused, Doug explained while cracking his knuckles one by one, they had photos they'd taken of me arriving at the cabin, my car's license plate, and they knew where I worked, where my ex-wife lived, where my parents had retired to in Florida. But if I cooperated, Kevin's debt would be cleared. I'd get $10,000 in cash for 2 hours of driving, and everyone would pretend this weekend never happened. The smart thing, Rodrigo added while sliding a car key across the table toward me. Would be to think of this as helping an old friend who'd made some mistakes, because the alternative, and here Doug smiled for the first time all night, revealing a gold tooth where his left canine should be, would be messier for everyone involved. I picked up the key, feeling its weight in my palm, and told them I needed to use the bathroom to think it over. Doug started to protest, but Rodrigo held up a hand, saying I had 5 minutes to accept the reality of my situation. The bathroom window was small but not impossible. I'd climbed through tighter spaces in college, and it opened onto the roof of the back porch. My car keys were in my jacket pocket, and if I could make it to my sedan, I might have a chance. But as I stood on the toilet seat pushing the window frame up, I heard Doug's voice directly below, telling someone on the phone to watch the road, that I might try to run. That's when I remembered the abandoned cabin we'd passed on the trail, the one with fresh tire tracks. They had someone stationed there too, probably had since before I even arrived. The whole weekend had been choreographed down to the minute, and Kevin's nervous phone checking suddenly made sense. He'd been getting updates on their timeline, making sure everything stayed on schedule. I came back to the dining room and set the key on the table, then did something they didn't expect. I pulled out my phone and started recording video, narrating everything that had just happened. Their names, Kevin's debt, the smuggling plan, speaking loud and clear while backing toward the door. Doug lunged forward, but I'd already hit share, uploading it to my cloud storage with a caption about my location, and that if anything happened to me, this was why. The beauty of modern technology is that even in places with terrible cell service, videos will eventually upload once they find a signal, and I made sure they understood that deleting it from my phone wouldn't matter. Rodrigo's gray eyes narrowed as he processed this. Then he looked at Kevin with such disgust that Kevin actually flinched. They left within 20 minutes, Doug shoving Kevin hard enough that he fell against the wall. Rodrigo warning me that I'd made a serious enemy, but acknowledging I'd played it smart. I spent the rest of that night in my locked car with the engine running, driving out at first light and heading straight to the police station in the nearest town. Kevin disappeared completely. His social media went dark. His phone number became disconnected. And when I looked up the cabin's address later, the rental listing had vanished. The police said without evidence of an actual crime being committed, there wasn't much they could do, but they'd keep the report on file. Sometimes I still get unknown calls that I don't answer, and I changed apartments twice in the 6 months after that weekend, but nothing ever came of it. I never found out what was supposed to be in that compartment, and honestly, I don't want to know. My boyfriend Nathan had been gone for maybe 2 hours when everything went sideways that Saturday in August. We'd been living together in Denver since June, sharing this apartment near Washington Park, where you could hear the trains at night and smell bread from the bakery downstairs every morning. Nathan handled logistics for a medical supply company. Basically meant he drove all over Colorado, checking warehouses and dealing with shipping problems. And that morning, Phoenix called about some emergency with their inventory system. Before he left, practically running out the door with his coffee still on the counter, he asked me to do him this favor: pick up a package from his friend Tom's house in Aurora. Said they'd been negotiating about these vintage baseball cards for months, already paid for, just needed someone to grab them. The address he texted me led to this neighborhood 40 minutes away where the GPS kept losing signal, and the street names didn't follow any pattern I could figure out. Tom's house sat at the end of Sycamore Court like it was hiding from the rest of the world, surrounded by these massive cottonwood trees that blocked most of the sunlight even at noon. The whole street felt abandoned, newspapers yellowing in driveways, lawns growing wild with dandelions and crabgrass, mailboxes stuffed so full the doors wouldn't close. His place stood out because everything was too neat, too deliberate. Perfectly trimmed hedges in perfect squares, a driveway without a single oil stain, and these wind chimes hanging from the porch ceiling that must have cost a fortune. Crystal and copper and some kind of black metal I couldn't identify. When I rang the doorbell, I heard movement inside right away, but nobody came to the door for several minutes. Just footsteps going back and forth, cabinets slamming, what sounded like books being moved around, until finally the locks turned. 3 of them, one after another. And this man appeared wearing clothes that belonged at a business meeting, not a Saturday afternoon. Tom looked nothing like what Nathan had described. Instead of the beer-belly contractor type I expected, here stood this thin guy, maybe mid-40s, with shoulders that curved forward like he spent his whole life hunched over something small and detailed. His hair was this unusual bronze color, definitely dyed but done professionally, slicked back with so much product it looked wet, and he had these pale gray eyes that never seemed to blink at the normal rate. The handshake he offered felt wrong somehow, his palm completely dry but cold, like he'd been holding ice cubes, and he held on for maybe 2 seconds longer than comfortable, studying my face like he was memorizing it. He said Nathan had told him all about me, which was weird because Nathan barely mentioned Tom except for the baseball card thing, and then he insisted I come inside while he got the package ready, said it would just take a minute to wrap it properly. The inside of his house made even less sense than the outside. Every wall painted this flat beige that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. No photos anywhere, no decorations except for these identical bronze sculptures on every surface that looked like twisted wire, formed into shapes that hurt to stare at too long. The living room had plastic covers on all the furniture like my grandmother used to have, but the plastic looked brand new, still had creases from the packaging, and underneath I could see dark green couches that probably cost more than my car. Tom disappeared down a hallway, telling me to make myself comfortable, and I heard him on the phone with someone, speaking too quietly to make out the words, but the tone sounded urgent, almost angry, lots of short, clipped sentences that ended with these long pauses. About 10 minutes passed before Tom came back, carrying not a package but a silver tray with coffee and these small sandwiches cut into perfect triangles, the crusts removed like something from a fancy hotel. He set it down on the coffee table, which made this hollow sound like it was completely empty inside, and told me the package was still being prepared upstairs. His business partner was wrapping it specially since the cards were so valuable. The coffee tasted strange. Not bad exactly, but like it had something else mixed in, maybe hazelnut or vanilla, but not quite either. And Tom watched me drink it with this intensity that made me take smaller sips than normal. He started asking questions about Nathan and me, how we met, where I worked, if my family lived nearby, did anybody know I was here today. That last one made me put the cup down because who asks something like that when you're just picking up baseball cards? The air in the room started feeling thicker, heavier, like before a storm but inside the house, and I noticed Tom had positioned himself between me and the front door without making it obvious, just casually standing there while he talked about how Nathan was smart to send me instead of coming himself. He said Nathan understood the situation perfectly, which made no sense because what situation could there be with baseball cards? And then he pulled out his phone to show me something. Except what appeared on the screen wasn't cards, but photos of documents, shipping manifests with highlighted sections, customs forms with Nathan's signature at the bottom. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Nathan calling, but when I reached for it, Tom shook his head slowly and said we needed to discuss what I was really here to pick up, because apparently Nathan hadn't been honest with either of us, and now I was what he called a liability in motion, whatever that meant. Tom walked to the window and pulled the curtains closed, even though it was barely 2 in the afternoon, the room dropping into this yellowish darkness from a single lamp with a shade that looked like human skin, all translucent and veined. He explained that Nathan's job wasn't just logistics. He'd been moving packages through the medical supply chain that contained things that weren't medical supplies, using his legitimate routes to hide shipments of pills that came from somewhere outside the country. The documents on his phone showed Nathan's signature on forms for containers that supposedly held syringes and gauze, but actually contained thousands of unmarked tablets, the kind that people were dying from all over Colorado. Tom said he used to handle the financial side until he realized Nathan was skimming. taking product for himself or selling it to other buyers. And now there were people asking questions, dangerous people who didn't accept excuses or believe in coincidences. My phone kept buzzing and Tom finally let me answer it, but he stayed close enough that I could smell his cologne, something medicinal and sharp like rubbing alcohol mixed with pine. Nathan's voice came through immediately, asking if I'd gotten the package yet, telling me to leave right now, don't drink anything Tom offered, just get out and drive home. But Tom grabbed the phone and put it on speaker so we could all hear. The two of them started arguing, Nathan insisting Tom was lying about everything, that he was paranoid and delusional from sampling his own product, while Tom kept repeating these numbers, dates, amounts, shipment codes, that made Nathan go quiet. Then Nathan said something that made my whole body go rigid. He told Tom that if anything happened to me, he'd already arranged for certain information to reach the authorities, that I was his insurance policy, which apparently was news to both Tom and me. Tom's face changed completely when he heard that, his polite mask slipping to show something underneath that reminded me of those nature documentaries where the snake goes perfectly still right before it strikes. He walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt, then another lock I hadn't noticed before, one that required a key from both sides, and he slipped that key into his shirt pocket while maintaining eye contact with me the whole time. On the phone, Nathan started yelling, saying he was calling the police, but Tom just laughed, this quiet, breathy sound that was somehow worse than screaming, and said Nathan wouldn't do that unless he wanted to explain the $300,000 in cash hidden in our apartment, money that apparently came from the sales Nathan had been making on the side. I didn't know about any money, had never seen anything like that in our place, but the silence on Nathan's end told me Tom wasn't lying about this part. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had moved in while we were talking, and I realized my arms and legs felt heavy, sluggish, like trying to move through water. Tom noticed me swaying and guided me to the couch, his grip on my elbow firm but not rough, almost gentle, like a nurse helping a patient, and he explained that the coffee just had a mild sedative, nothing dangerous, just something to keep everyone calm while we sorted this out. Nathan was screaming through the phone now, threatening Tom with names of people I'd never heard, saying they were already on their way, but Tom picked up my phone and hung up, then removed the battery and SIM card with practiced efficiency. He sat across from me in this antique chair that creaked under his weight and pulled out a second phone, started scrolling through messages, showing me conversations between Nathan and buyers, photos of our apartment building, even a picture of me walking to my car from 2 weeks ago that someone had sent to Nathan as what Tom called leverage verification. Tom explained that I had exactly two choices. I could take a package back to Nathan, not baseball cards, but a GPS tracker hidden inside what looked like a vintage card box, something that would let Tom's associates know every move Nathan made until they recovered their money. Or I could wait here until Nathan arrived to trade himself for me, which Tom said would happen within the hour based on how desperate he'd sounded. The sedative was wearing off faster than Tom expected, probably because I'd only drunk half the coffee, and I could feel my mind getting sharper even though I kept my body slack, let him think I was still foggy. That's when I noticed something Tom hadn't. A car had pulled up outside, engine still running, and through the gap in the curtains I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat just waiting. Tom's phone rang and he walked to the kitchen to answer it, speaking in Spanish this time, agitated, lots of no, and what sounded like excuses, and I realized whoever was outside wasn't with Tom. The moment Tom turned his back, I forced myself up from the couch, my legs barely cooperating but adrenaline helping, and stumbled toward the back of the house where I'd seen a sliding door earlier. Tom heard me moving and came running back, but I'd already reached the door, was fumbling with the lock when he grabbed my wrist, not violent but firm, saying I was making a mistake, that whoever was outside wasn't there to help me but to clean up Nathan's mess permanently. The car door opened outside and someone stepped out, a woman in a business suit carrying what looked like a small metal briefcase, and Tom actually looked scared for the first time, pulling me away from the door and toward the stairs, saying we needed to hide, both of us right now. But I didn't trust him any more than I trusted Nathan at that point, So when he loosened his grip to lock the sliding door, I grabbed one of those bronze sculptures and swung it at the window beside the door, shattering it completely, the sound like an explosion in the quiet house. And I squeezed through the opening, feeling glass tear my jacket, cutting my hands. But I kept going, running through his backyard toward the fence while behind me, Tom yelled something about not letting her see me. But it was too late. I was already climbing over, dropping into the neighbor's yard, their dog barking like crazy as I ran between houses toward the street. My car was parked 3 houses down and I sprinted toward it, keys already in my hand, blood from the cuts making them slippery. And I could hear footsteps behind me, not running but walking fast, confident, like whoever it was knew I couldn't get away. The engine started on the first try and I reversed out so fast I clipped someone's trash cans, sending them rolling into the street. But I didn't stop, just threw it in drive and floored it out of that neighborhood. In the rearview mirror, I saw the woman in the suit standing in the middle of the road, not chasing, just watching me leave. And she was holding something up. My wallet, which must have fallen out during the escape, meaning she now had my driver's license, my address, everything. I drove straight to the police station downtown, my hands leaving bloody prints on the steering wheel, and walked inside looking like I'd been attacked, which got their attention immediately. The detective who interviewed me, a woman named Reeves with gray hair pulled back tight and coffee stains on her sleeve, listened to the whole story without interrupting once, just taking notes in this little spiral notebook with handwriting so small I couldn't read it upside down. When I finished, she made some calls, sent officers to Tom's address, but they found the house completely empty. Not just no people, but no furniture, no bronze sculptures, nothing except those wind chimes still tinkling on the porch. Our apartment was different, though. They found the money exactly where Tom said it would be, wrapped in plastic and hidden inside a hole cut in the back of our bedroom closet, behind a piece of drywall Nathan had apparently removed and replaced so carefully I'd never noticed. Nathan never came home that day or any day after. His phone disconnected. His car found abandoned at a rest stop near the Wyoming border with blood on the driver's seat that turned out to be his type, but not enough to mean he was dead. The DEA got involved after that, took over the case, asked me the same questions 50 different ways, but I didn't know anything useful, just that I'd been living with a stranger for 2 years and almost died because of it. The diesel engine had been humming under me for 19 hours straight when I saw those reflective markers gleaming in the darkness ahead. My frozen food delivery run should have ended 6 hours earlier, but a jackknifed semi near the state line had trapped me and dozens of other trucks in gridlock hell. By the time traffic started moving again, dispatch was screaming through the radio about penalty fees and angry restaurant owners, so stopping at a motel wasn't even an option anymore. Every joint in my body ached from sitting in that worn driver's seat, and the gas station coffee I'd been chugging had stopped working around hour 15. The truck's heater was blasting hot air straight at my face, making my eyes water and blur, turning the empty highway into a river of black asphalt and yellow lines that seemed to breathe and shift in my peripheral vision. That exit ramp appeared through my windshield like a mirage, the curve of it matching what my exhausted brain expected to see after making this run twice a week for the past 3 years. The reflective markers caught my headlights at just the right angle, and my arms moved the steering wheel before my mind could even question whether this was actually my turn. The second my tires hit that side road, though, everything felt wrong. The surface was rough and uneven, making the whole cab shake and rattle in a way that should have snapped me fully awake. But exhaustion does strange things to your judgment, makes you rationalize stuff that would normally set off every alarm bell in your head. No streetlights lined this road. No familiar landmarks appeared in my high beams, just dense walls of pine trees pressing in from both sides like they were trying to swallow the narrow strip of broken pavement. My phone had been charging in the cup holder, and when I grabbed it to check my GPS, the screen showed 0 bars, and the map app just spun endlessly trying to find a signal. The clock on the dashboard read 1:47 a.m., and I'd been driving down this dark road for at least 10 minutes already, way longer than the usual 3-minute stretch from the highway to my neighborhood. Part of me knew I should stop, turn around, get back to the interstate and find the right exit, but another part, the exhausted, stubborn part that just wanted to be home, kept pushing the accelerator. The fuel gauge showed a quarter tank left, enough to drive around lost for a while, but not enough to waste if I really had no idea where I was heading. Every shadow outside the windows looked like it could be hiding a driveway or a street sign, but when my headlights swept across them, there was nothing but more trees and occasionally a rusted guardrail that looked like it hadn't been replaced since the 70s. Then the road started getting narrower, and I mean really narrow, to the point where pine branches were scraping against the side mirrors with this horrible scratching sound that made my teeth hurt. The pavement turned to gravel, then to packed dirt with patches of ice that made the rear of the truck fishtail every few seconds. My breathing got shallow and quick because now I couldn't even attempt a 3-point turn if I wanted to. The trees were too close, and the truck was too long. The only option was to keep going forward and hope for a clearing or a driveway wide enough to turn around in. That's when exhaustion hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull, my vision starting to tunnel, my head nodding forward involuntarily. I knew if I didn't stop immediately, I'd either crash into a tree or drive off into a ditch, so when I spotted a slightly wider section of road up ahead, I pulled over as far as I could and threw the truck in park. The plan was just to rest my eyes for 5 minutes, maybe 10 at most, just enough to stop seeing double and get my bearings straight. I cracked the window slightly to let cold air in, hoping it would keep me from falling too deep asleep, then leaned my seat back and closed my eyes. The last thing I remember thinking was how quiet everything was. No traffic sounds, no wind, not even birds or crickets, just this thick silence that pressed against my eardrums. When I opened my eyes again, the dashboard clock showed 4:23 a.m., which meant I'd been out cold for over 2 hours. My neck was stiff as hell, and my mouth tasted like something had died in it. But what really made my chest tighten was realizing the truck wasn't where I'd parked it. Instead of being on that narrow dirt road surrounded by pine trees, I was sitting in front of a 2-story house with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch that looked older than my grandfather. The truck was perfectly parallel, parked along what appeared to be a proper paved driveway, the kind with those neat concrete borders and everything, like someone had carefully maneuvered it into position while I slept. My keys were still in the ignition, the engine was off, and the parking brake was engaged, things I definitely didn't remember doing. But what really made every hair on my arm stand up was the porch light being on, casting this sickly yellow glow over the front door, and there was someone standing behind the screen door, just a dark silhouette that wasn't moving at all. They were just standing there, perfectly still, like they'd been waiting for me to wake up. The worst part was how my truck's headlights were still on, pointing directly at the house, which meant whoever was standing there had been watching me sleep this entire time, probably seeing my face clearly through the windshield while they remained hidden in shadow. My first instinct was to start the engine and get the hell out of there, but when I turned the key, nothing happened, not even that clicking sound you get with a dead battery. The fuel gauge still showed a quarter tank, all the dashboard lights came on normally, but the engine wouldn't even try to turn over. That's when the figure behind the screen door moved for the first time, raising one hand and pressing it flat against the mesh like they were trying to push through it. Even from 40 feet away, I could see their fingers were way too long, each one bent at weird angles like they'd been broken and healed wrong multiple times. Then they knocked, 3 slow, deliberate taps that echoed across the empty yard, and I swear the sound was louder inside the truck than it should have been, like they were knocking directly on my windshield. I grabbed my phone again, praying for even 1 bar of signal to call for help, but the screen wouldn't even turn on this time, completely dead despite being plugged into the charger for hours. The person behind the door knocked again. Same pattern, 3 measured taps, and then they spoke in this raspy voice that sounded like they'd been gargling gravel. "Delivery's late, but you're finally here." My manifest was sitting on the passenger seat, and when I glanced at it, trying to make sense of what was happening, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. An additional delivery address handwritten at the bottom in shaky blue ink that was still wet and smearing. The address matched the rusted numbers I could barely make out on a crooked mailbox at the end of the driveway. 4862 Millbrook Way. But here's the thing that really messed with my head. Millbrook Way was the street I grew up on, except my childhood home burned down 15 years ago. And this house, this exact house with the same peeling paint and busted porch railing, looked exactly like it did in the old photos my mom kept in our family albums. The figure pushed the screen door open with those grotesque fingers, and it made this horrible screech that sounded exactly like the door at my childhood home used to sound. My dad never fixed it, always said he'd get around to oiling those hinges next weekend. Now I could see more details in the porch light, stringy gray hair hanging past their shoulders, clothes that looked like they'd been buried in dirt and dug up again, and a face I couldn't quite focus on, like my eyes kept sliding off it whenever I tried to look directly at them. They stepped onto the porch, moving in this jerky, unnatural way, like someone was pulling them forward with invisible strings. 28 years, they said, and my blood turned to ice because that was my exact age. 28 years since you were supposed to make this delivery, and now you're here just like we arranged. My hand fumbled for the door handle, ready to bolt on foot if I had to, but the doors wouldn't unlock. The mechanism just clicked uselessly when I pulled on it. The interior lights started flickering, and in those brief moments of darkness, I could see more figures appearing on the porch, all of them moving with that same puppet-like jerkiness. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them, all wearing clothes from different decades like they'd each been waiting here for years. One wore a milk delivery uniform from what looked like the 1950s, another had on a postal worker outfit that was rotting at the seams, and there was even someone in a pizza delivery shirt from a chain that went out of business when I was a kid. They all stood there, swaying slightly, and then they all spoke in unison with that same gravelly voice. Every road leads here eventually, when you're tired enough to take the turn. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had left, and I slammed my shoulder into the driver's door hard enough to pop something in my shoulder socket. The door burst open and I tumbled out onto the cold driveway, scrambling to my feet as those things started moving down the porch steps toward me. But the moment my boots hit the ground, everything changed. The house started to shimmer and fade like heat waves rising off hot asphalt. The figures dissolved into wisps of fog, and suddenly I was standing in an empty lot full of charred foundation stones and blackened timber. My truck was parked right where my old bedroom used to be, engine running smooth as silk, like nothing had ever been wrong with it. The dashboard clock showed 4:31 a.m., and when I looked at my phone, it was working perfectly with full battery and 3 bars of signal, showing my location as the vacant lot at 4862 Millbrook Way, the real one, the one that had been empty since the fire that killed the previous owners back in 1995. I got back in that truck and drove straight home without stopping, didn't even care that I was technically stealing company property by not returning to the depot first. When I checked the manifest later, that handwritten address was gone, just blank paper where it had been. I quit that job the next morning, didn't even give notice, just dropped the keys in the mail slot and never went back. The company called a few times asking about the missing hours in my delivery log and why the GPS showed my truck stationary at an address that didn't exist for over 2 hours. But I never answered. Sometimes I drive past that empty lot where my childhood home used to be, and there's nothing there but weeds and broken concrete. But once, just once, about 6 months later, I saw another delivery truck parked there at dawn. Driver slumped over the wheel, and I wanted to wake them up, warn them, but I kept driving because I knew, somehow I just knew, that whatever uses that place as bait only works when you're exhausted enough to see what isn't really there, or maybe to see what's more real than anything else. That weekend drive was supposed to be nothing more than a break before finals. We had packed the car with too much junk food, old playlists, and that careless energy you only get in your early 20s. I remember the road shimmering in the heat and the smell of gasoline mixing with sunscreen and energy drinks. There were 5 of us: me, Brandon, Emily, Paige, and Connor. We had no real destination, just a rough plan to head west until the tank told us to stop. I was behind the wheel when Paige pointed out something beyond the trees: rusted metal, faint colors, and the shape of a Ferris wheel tilting against the horizon. We pulled over near a chain-link fence half swallowed by weeds. The sign hanging from it was so sun-bleached that only the word fairground was still readable. A carousel spun lazily inside, half its bulbs dead, the rest flickering like they were fighting to stay alive. The air was heavy and still, not the kind of silence that feels calm, more like everything nearby had forgotten how to move. Brandon joked about Instagram gold, and before I could say anything, everyone was already climbing through a gap in the fence, laughing like kids sneaking into a swimming pool after hours. The ground inside was soft with old popcorn and leaves. Booths stood like hollow ribs along the main walkway, paint peeling off in sheets, prizes still hanging from hooks, their eyes faded to ghostly dots. The carousel kept turning, slow and uneven, making a sound that reminded me of a breath drawn through teeth. Emily said it must be running on leftover power from the nearby substation, but I could tell she was only guessing. There was something uneasy about how that thing turned, steady, deliberate, as if it was waiting for someone. By the time the sun started to dip, the air had cooled, and our excitement began to fade into quiet. Connor had wandered toward the Ferris wheel, Brandon was filming the carousel with his phone, and Paige was calling out for them to pose for pictures. I hung back near the entrance, feeling the fence rattle behind me every now and then, though no wind was blowing. I remember thinking I heard a faint tune, a melody that seemed to hum through the fairground, distant but persistent, like an old carnival song played underwater. Brandon was the first to disappear. We were gathered near a row of game stalls when Emily asked where he went. His phone light had been visible a moment earlier, bouncing around the carousel's mirrors. Then it just vanished. We called out his name a few times, laughing at first, assuming he was trying to mess with us. But when Paige walked over to where he had been, she found his backpack lying on the ground, one strap torn like it had caught on something sharp. No sign of him anywhere. Connor suggested he might have gone to the Ferris wheel again, though that was in the opposite direction. We split up, Paige and I heading toward the rides while Emily checked the ticket booth. The deeper we went, the more the fairground seemed to change. The air felt thick, and the lights flickered slower, like each bulb was running out of breath. Somewhere behind the carousel, I heard the faint creak of metal, followed by what sounded like laughter, but not Brandon's. It was higher, thinner, and carried an echo that did not fade naturally. When we regrouped near the entrance, Emily wasn't with us. Paige was calling her name again and again, her voice cracking a little more each time. Connor climbed onto a bench to get a better look around, shining his flashlight in wide arcs. The beam caught on something by the carousel, a smear of red across one of the painted horses. The strange part was that the horse's head had shifted since we last saw it, tilted slightly toward us as if listening. Connor swore it had been facing the other way earlier. We ran to the fence, but the gap we had crawled through was gone. The wire had been twisted back into place, rusted edges overlapping like it had always been sealed. My phone showed no signal, and every direction past the fairground faded into blackness that the flashlights could not cut through. Paige was crying. Connor kept shouting for Emily and Brandon, and all I could hear beneath it was that same distant melody, louder now, circling around us in uneven bursts. Connor said he saw movement near the Ferris wheel, so we went that way, staying close together. The closer we got, the more the ground seemed to tilt slightly, like the earth itself was uneven under the rides. The Ferris wheel stood still now, but its cabins swayed as though someone invisible was stepping inside each one. Paige whispered that she heard a voice calling her name from one of the cars. Before I could stop her, she ran ahead, disappearing behind a row of tents. I shouted and followed, only to find her phone lying in the dirt, screen cracked, camera still recording the empty space in front of it. Connor grabbed my arm and told me we had to leave, find another way out. We followed the sound of running water, thinking there might be a drainage ditch along the back fence. The air smelled of rust and wet soil. When we reached the edge, we found a small service gate hanging crooked on its hinges. Beyond it was nothing but dark highway, silent and endless. Connor pushed the gate and it opened without resistance. I turned around for one last glance at the fairground, and the lights had all gone out, every single one. Only the carousel remained, still turning in perfect circles, though I could not hear the motor anymore. We made it back to the car somehow. Neither of us said a word on the drive home. Connor stared straight ahead the entire time, his knuckles pale against the steering wheel. When we stopped at a gas station miles later, he ran inside to use the bathroom and never came back. I searched the aisles, the lot, even asked the cashier if anyone else had come through. No one had. His wallet was still on the passenger seat when I got back to the car. I left it there and drove until morning, unsure if the road was even leading anywhere real anymore. It has been years since that night. I tried reporting what happened, but the local sheriff claimed the fairground had been demolished decades ago after an accident killed several workers. When I showed him the photos still on my phone, he looked at me like I was lying. Most of them were blank, except one. It shows the carousel perfectly lit and 5 people standing beside it. Only 2 of us have faces. I remember that night with a kind of clarity that feels unfair. Every sound, every color, even the way the air smelled when I stepped out of the bar. It's all still there. I had been laughing louder than usual, trying to seem more relaxed than I really was. It was late, and most of the office crew had already called their rides or booked a car. When I noticed Michael still sitting at the bar, scrolling through his phone, I told him I could take him home. He hesitated just for a second, but I brushed it off with that same stupid confidence people mistake for control. I told everyone I was fine, that I hadn't had much to drink. Michael wasn't just a coworker. He was the kind of person who remembered everyone's coffee order, who stayed late to help when no one asked. We had shared shifts, lunch breaks, and quiet complaints about management. That night he had looked tired, like someone who wanted the week to end already. I think that's why I insisted. Maybe a part of me wanted to feel useful, like I could do something decent for once. I remember the faint hum of the neon sign outside the bar flickering red on his glasses as he finally said, "All right, if you're sure." We took the long way home, not because it was faster, but because someone had mentioned police checkpoints near the main road. I laughed it off, saying it was safer to take the back roads anyway. The truth was, I didn't want to risk it. Pride. That's all it was. The kind of pride that makes you smile when someone questions your judgment, when deep down you know you shouldn't even be holding the keys. The first few miles were quiet. Trees on both sides, the sound of tires against gravel, and Michael talking softly about a podcast he had been listening to. I can't even remember the name of it now. Then came the curve. It's strange how a single stretch of road can live inside your head forever. Wasn't sharp, not even dangerous in daylight. But that night the air was damp, the asphalt dark and slick. I remember the headlights catching something reflective, maybe a road sign, maybe a puddle. And for a second my hands tightened on the wheel. The car drifted, just a little, enough for me to overcorrect. The sound of the tires losing grip was followed by silence so sudden it didn't make sense. Then the world folded in on itself. Metal, glass, and something I can never unhear. When I opened my eyes, everything was wrong. The windshield was gone, the radio was still playing, and the smell of burnt rubber mixed with something metallic that made me want to be sick. The world outside looked tilted, like the trees were leaning in to stare. My seatbelt had locked so hard that it felt like my ribs had been clamped. Michael was quiet beside me, his head turned slightly as if he had just fallen asleep. I called his name once, then again, but the sound came out like a whisper I didn't recognize as my own. There was no response, not even the smallest movement. People talk about adrenaline, how it keeps you from feeling pain, but that night, It felt more like I had been separated from myself entirely. I remember stumbling out of the car, barefoot, the gravel cutting into my feet, and just standing there. The road stretched behind us, empty and black. The only light came from one of the car's headlights, still glowing weakly through the steam rising from the hood. I kept expecting to see another car come by, someone who could help, but no one did. It was like that road had disappeared from the map just for us. When the first responder arrived, a local deputy, I think, I was sitting in the grass, hugging my knees. He asked me questions I couldn't answer. "How fast were you going? Did you have anything to drink tonight?" I remember shaking my head automatically, even though we both knew the truth was sitting heavy in the air between us. They covered Michael with a blanket that looked too clean, too white for that place. The sound of the zipper when they put him in the body bag didn't belong in the world. It shouldn't have existed. The next days blurred together like a punishment. Hospital lights, paperwork, the smell of antiseptic that clung to everything. My parents showed up, their faces caught between anger and worry. But I couldn't look at them for long. When the officer came to tell me about the charge, vehicular manslaughter, I didn't even react. I remember staring at his badge and thinking how polished it looked, how it reflected the ceiling light in this neat little circle. I had killed someone, and I was noticing reflections. That realization hit harder than any word they said afterward. Court hearings became a rhythm I couldn't escape. Every appearance felt the same. The hum of fluorescent lights, the shuffle of papers, the quiet coughs echoing through the room. I avoided Michael's family every time they were there. His mother once glanced in my direction, and I looked away so fast it hurt my neck. There are no words that can fix something like that. The prosecution didn't need to exaggerate anything. My own choices were evidence enough. When the judge read the sentence, community service, license revoked, probation, I knew I had gotten a mercy I didn't deserve. Life after the trial felt quieter in the wrong ways. Friends stopped calling. Co-workers avoided eye contact when I returned to the office. The empty chair where Michael used to sit was replaced within a week, but I couldn't forget how his coffee mug had a small chip near the handle. It was ridiculous, the things that stuck. I sold my car, moved to a smaller apartment, and started taking the bus. Every time I heard tires screech, even from blocks away, my body reacted before my mind could tell me it was nothing. Nights were the worst. Dreams that ended in that same curve, that same sound of metal folding in on itself. Therapy helped in pieces. My counselor said I needed to forgive myself eventually, but I don't think forgiveness works like that. It isn't something you earn by being sorry enough or by surviving long enough. Some mornings, I drive to the memorial Michael's family built by the road. A small wooden cross, flowers that change with the seasons, and sometimes a photo that fades in the sun. I sit there in silence until the air grows heavy. The world keeps moving, but that stretch of road never does. It feels stuck in the same second, waiting for something that already happened. I do not drink anymore. I do not drive either, not even short distances. People tell me I should try again, that it has been years, but I cannot. Every decision since that night has been about preventing another one like it. Maybe that is what living with guilt really means. Not a single haunting moment, but a constant negotiation with yourself to never forget why it happened. I do not expect peace, and maybe I do not deserve it. But I still visit that road, and sometimes, when I stand there long enough, I whisper his name, just to remind the world that he mattered. It had been a long weekend, the kind that drains you in a good way. A mix of bad coffee, gas station snacks, and hours of pointless conversations. My friend Ryan and I were heading back to campus after spending 2 days in the mountains. It was close to midnight when we decided to take a detour. Ryan claimed it would shave off almost an hour if we cut through an old rural road that barely appeared on the GPS. I remember hesitating, watching the black stretch of road vanish into the trees, but we were tired and wanted to get home before dawn. That road felt different from the rest. There were no houses, no street lights, Not even the hum of other cars. Just the sound of gravel under the tires and the steady rhythm of the wipers scraping against a thin drizzle. The dashboard light painted Ryan's face in a strange green hue, making him look older, worn out. He kept glancing at the fuel gauge, muttering that we'd make it fine. I tried to joke about horror movies starting this way, but even my laugh sounded forced. The air got colder as we climbed a gentle slope. My phone had lost signal miles ago, and the only light came from the headlights cutting through the mist. I noticed a shape on the side of the road. Small, moving, hard to make out. Before I could say anything, Ryan hit the brakes. The thud that followed didn't sound like an animal. It was heavy, final, followed by a dull scrape beneath the bumper. For a second, neither of us spoke. The silence after the impact was worse than the sound itself. Ryan jumped out first. I stayed inside, gripping the seatbelt, trying to convince myself we had hit a deer. He shouted something I couldn't hear, so I stepped out. The smell of wet asphalt and iron filled the air. I saw the shape, pale, motionless, lying twisted near the ditch. It looked like a man, not an animal. His legs were bent wrong and there was a torn jacket half soaked in mud. My brain refused to accept it. Ryan kept repeating that we couldn't stay, that no one would believe us if we called the police from an isolated road at midnight. We dragged the body off the road without saying a word. My hands were numb, but not from the cold. I remember the weight of his arm as it slipped from my grip, the sound of his jacket brushing against the gravel. Ryan kept whispering that it was the only way, that if anyone drove by and saw us, it would look worse than it was. We pushed him into the ditch and I caught a glimpse of his face, half covered in mud, one eye open. It didn't look like a person anymore, just something broken and empty. I forced myself to look away. The drive after that felt endless. Neither of us spoke. The rain got heavier, washing away the blood that had splattered on the hood. Every time the wipers moved, I saw flashes of that face in the streaked glass. Ryan's jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. He said he would take the car to a friend's garage the next morning, get the bumper fixed, and no one would ever know. I wanted to believe him, but I could still smell the metallic air every time I breathed in. Sleep that night felt impossible. 2 days later, the sound of knocking woke me up before sunrise. When I looked out my window, there was a police cruiser parked by the curb. My chest tightened as I watched 2 officers walk toward Ryan's house across the street. We had grown up in the same neighborhood, just a few houses apart. They talked to him for a while, then one of them pointed toward my place. Moments later, there was a knock on my own door. The officer said they were investigating a hit and run on that same road we had taken. A man had been found dead in a ditch. The words barely made sense as he spoke them. He said the man had survived a motorcycle crash and was trying to crawl for help when we hit him. The security camera at a small gas station had caught our car passing through minutes before the incident. They wanted both of us to come down to the station for questioning. Ryan looked like a ghost when we saw each other there. He kept rubbing his temples, muttering that it was an accident. The detective didn't say much, but his expression said everything. He knew we had seen that it was a man. Ryan was charged first. His fingerprints were found on the hood, and the paint samples matched the traces from the victim's clothes. When they questioned me, I told them the truth, at least most of it. I said we thought it was an animal, that everything happened too fast. They wrote it all down without looking up. When the interview ended, the officer said something that stuck with me. Panic doesn't erase responsibility. Those words played over and over in my head for days afterward, louder than any siren could have been. The media got hold of the story soon after. Headlines called it a tragic accident, but online, people had their own version. 2 careless students who ran from what they'd done. My phone filled with messages from classmates pretending to check in just to get details. Ryan stopped answering my calls. His parents moved him out of the dorms before the semester ended. I kept going to class, pretending to focus, but every time a car passed too close, I flinched. Every night, I heard the sound of that impact in my dreams. Months went by and the case faded from the news. Ryan's lawyer managed to negotiate a plea deal. I was classified as a witness, not an accomplice. but it did not feel like I deserved the distance that label gave me. I avoided that road whenever I drove home. One evening, I took the long route through the city, and still, at one stoplight, I saw a man on the shoulder, limping under the flickering yellow light. It was just a stranger, probably someone fixing his car, but I could not breathe until the light turned green. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I sometimes wonder if the man we hit had seen our headlights coming, if he raised his hand, hoping we would stop. I never asked the police for details. I did not want to know his name or the town he was from. It feels wrong to attach a full story to someone whose ending I helped write. The truth is, the silence afterward was not just fear. It was shame, the kind that lingers long after punishment ends.